early in your career, I got to ask, did you have like this something deep down inside, like God's going to use me to save this guy? I'm going to save Eminem.
Absolutely.
Feel people in on
absolutely unequivocally no.
No, oh man.
No, absolutely not. I wish I was that. I wish I was this smart to think, all the way back then.
AJ, you put your foot in this one, man. Once again, it's on with the track I'm flowing on, holding on like them 2 nails in his open palm. Wrote a song like I'm King David when he wrote a song. Luke Skywalker, call me now Floby One. Kenobi, but the sin can never hold me. Whether I'm chilling with the homies or just all by my lonely. Well, he got me only through the mess.
Oh my gosh, this album is so good. All you have to do is go to the Kickstarter. It's in the show notes. Give some money, and this album is yours, KJ-52. As he gets older, he's not slowing down. So, hey, this one is a fun one for me. I love hip-hop, and I've been neck deep in what I guess you could refer to as the Christian music industry ever since the day my parents pulled the plug on my radio listening days back in the mid-'80s. In the 4th grade, we were introduced to Stryper, and the rest is history. I'll never forget my brother trying to sneak listening to Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, and at the time it was in our household seen as like a Holy Spirit hunch that my mom had. She came up to me and she said, "Joey, is that Christian music your brother's playing?" And to my chagrin, I couldn't lie to my mom. I said, "No, ma'am, that's Guns N' Roses." My brother got in trouble. So, in fact, we go so old school in Christian music talk. I have a chapter marker there, and I bet your podcast player has the capacity to skip. So if you aren't in the group of like 5 to 10 people where this stuff is ear candy, it's so fun. Skip away to hear, oh man, like what it was for KJ to be a white guy in the rap industry, how he opened up for Tribe Called Quest, how Christian rap needed to keep up with its secular counterparts in gangster rap back in the day. And the only way to talk violence was to talk about being gangster on Lucifer and his punk-ass demons on the spiritual streets of wickedness, my friend. Oh, we talked the Eminem comparison that KJ-52 had to listen to, how he handled it, and how some people think that his song Dear Slim may have done the trick after all, introducing Eminem to the Lord years later. Yes, sir. So we talk a little faith stuff, mental health as well. And hey, this is the last episode of the year that's not Christmassy. Next week, I'll have my childhood friends back on to talk about growing up in my city of Charleston as a low-income black kid during Christmas and comparing it to my experiences as a middle-class white guy, or according to my friends, rich-ass white guy. 361, episode 361 is the first conversation we had along those lines. Go check it out. I think you'll enjoy. And then the following week, right before Christmas, we'll have our traditional morning during the holidays episode. I have a therapist coming on who also lived through a really tough divorce. Husband had an affair and didn't want out of it. So it'll be a story to hear, but also learning from how a therapist walked through it. And she even prepared herself for the holidays. It's going to be a good one. Hope everyone is doing well. Again, go to the show notes, throw some money at this project, get some killer music, and have a good week. It's KJ-52. Bam!
Yes, you are. You got it. Yes, Lord. Ain't nothing too hard for you. Yes, Lord. You got it. Sitting in the sun, I'm crying in the rain. Like every single day, I'm waking up and it just felt the same. Hey, what I become, I'm on the run. You hear the pain, nothing changed. Praying out of God.
That sounds great. And honestly, man, I'm an open book. There's very few things I would say that I wouldn't talk about. I'm not a guarded person, so.
Sweet. What kind of underwear do you have on right this second?
I have on, I think it's my Reebok ones. And
he's going there.
Somebody said they're called man panties versus tighty whities. I've heard that phrase before. I thought it was pretty funny.
You know, my wife cannot stand the word panties, and I think the only other word that she hates more is more.
I was about to say, because that's like a very hated word.
So you put those two things together, and I am on her shit list, man. Hey, so I am a big hip hop guy. Have been my whole life.
Awesome.
I think it was probably, let's say, 07 or 08 where I didn't feel guilty about listening to non-Christian stuff. So I was real, like I looked far and hard for the real good Christian rap.
Nice.
And my brother and I also bought everything that was ever released on Tooth and Nail, probably for its maybe 2 first years of existence. It was just kind of like they had the credibility. Whatever they released, we're just going to buy.
Yeah.
Do you remember? And I don't know if I think it's just a person named Furthermore.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first, I mean, they were hyping it up like crazy and talking about the first hip hop release. And now looking back, I can really much, I mean, who cares, my opinion, bottom line, but looking back, I now recognize the brilliance and the creativity and the uniqueness, but I was so disappointed because I was thinking this is going to be like some hardcore, like gospel gangsters, sort of like in your face sort of thing. And I had never heard anything like it. And I kept thinking, okay, it's going to, it's starting to get raw, and it never happened.
It was very esoteric, like abstract.
Yeah.
I think they're 2 Mormon guys, basically.
Are they really?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I don't know if they were practicing, but if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong. I've only maybe talked to them once back in the day, like, and it was like in passing at GMA or something like that. I never really saw the label do a ton of like promo on them. Yeah, I think it was, and I'm sure Tooth and Nail, like they sign things just for the art a lot of times that they think it's cool.
Right. So after that, I think they actually ended up starting. Gosh, there was a rap label, and I can't remember what it was called. It's
called Uprock.
Uprock. That's right. That's right. So MG the Visionary, I remember listening to him, and then I was big in the SFC. So I think his name was Super C.
He was Soup the Chemist when he was on there.
That's it. So Toby Morell from Emory tells me about you, and you'll never guess the album that I started listening to, and probably the only album that I really listened to a lot by you is Soul Purpose, and I loved it.
Wow.
It was just so poppy. I loved it. Oh my gosh. And
that's from the wow. Okay.
I want to hear your thoughts on it, because your reaction was pretty crazy. But then lastly, it was pretty exciting when Toby did a collaboration with you, the Wake Up song. Yeah. But that's kind of the extent, man. That's kind of the extent.
It's funny,
Tell me about Soul Purpose.
Soul Purpose was, it was when Brandon was handing out deals like candy. And I had a non-exclusive deal with him, which was pretty unheard of. I never went anywhere else with it. Again, he's a creative guy, and he was like, if you came to him with an idea that he thought was cool, he'd pretty much, greenlight it if you could do it cheaply, and a cost efficient. So myself and my producer, Todd Collins, who I had done a ton of stuff with, we were like, what if we did something that was unabashedly, hooky and pop, like pop rap. It was kind of like when Jay-Z was doing the best of both worlds, like Jay-Z and R. Kelly were doing like this like smash up idea. And I thought, well, you sing, you produce, I rap, I write. What if we demo this and try it? And Brand's like, all right, you know what I mean? Like he basically gave me 2 side projects at the time. That was Peace of Mind, which is like a rap rock project, and then Soul Purpose.
And this was on top of the stuff that you were
on top of the solo stuff. Yeah. And I was also like in a space where I was like, I write really fast. Me and Todd work really quick. And it was just like, we could probably bang this whole thing out. And the cost would be next to nothing because he was producing it. It was the only project that really got killed right out the gate, like purposely. Ironically, it got like
Soul Purpose got purposely canned.
Soul Purpose got no purpose, and it was literally canned like that. I'm not joking, because like,
why is it? They just didn't like it?
Not from their end. It was my manager. I think she was like, "This is too confusing to the public, and you're KJ, and you're doing this other thing over here." And I think we shipped like, I don't know, 15,000 copies, and it was decided like no more copies will be printed. So it was like, it was decidedly killed, and it's not like we ever performed it or did it. And if anything, I was like, man, that was like a miss, and then it would be every once in a while, someone would be like, is this your thing? Like that song really spoke to me. And I'd always be like, the only thing this is what's so ironic about it. You jump forward, I think it was almost 10, 12 years later. And somehow or another, one of the songs got licensed in Australia for a commercial for like this bicycle guy who was in the Olympics. And he ended up winning or something like that. It shot the song to #1 on iTunes just in Australia. So
yeah, but still, that's awesome. That's a whole continent.
The license of that, like, not only paid for the album, it basically put the album like in the plus category. Great. And it was out of nowhere, had no particular purpose. And we don't know why that happened, but you know how the music industry is.
That's how crazy is it? That's how I know you as a musician. That's what I listen to the most. In whatever terms and however you want to talk about it, what was the extent of success with, were you technically on BEC?
So I was signed to Uprock. Because they wanted an artist on the rap label that was like, I don't care, I'm trying to sell some records, right? You know what I mean? Like youth group friendly, church friendly. They signed me to like sell records, really. Once Uprock kind of was like dissolved, they moved me to BEC. But once I understood how Tooth and Nail worked, it's all the same 20 employees. Yep. Like it was just all about perception. You know what I'm saying? So
I remember, dude, I even remember, and the old school Tooth and Nail people are just going to love this conversation. I remember how Brandon marketed BEC. He literally said Value Pack, Supertones, and Joy Electric are going to another label. And we're like, what the hell? They're going to another label? BEC? I don't even know BEC is. No, we didn't know it was Brandon Abel Creations, but we saw it as they were leaving Tooth and Nail.
Right. Yeah. He was a genius of perception, right? And, once I kind of saw behind that, because I mean, like before I ever signed, they flew me up there. I met everybody. I walked around, and I was already very familiar with Tooth and Nail, so it wasn't that. But even that, I was like, oh, okay. All right. So, even ironically, like when I did Peace of Mind, Brandon was like, we're just going to be you. And then we're going to hire 4 models behind you. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, good or bad. It is what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. What's success look like? I mean, I know everybody sees success differently, but I guess where I'm getting at mostly is, were you supporting yourself? Did you go through a season where that's all you were doing, or what?
Yeah. So I kind of like, I could tell you my career really simple.
Yeah.
The first year I got signed, which was not Tooth and Nail, it was Essential Records. Total not success, right? Got dropped by the label, went in debt, almost got evicted, almost got my car repossessed. Dang. Just lost tons of money. Didn't know what I was doing.
In your 20s, what? 20s?
I was 25.
Okay.
Yeah, I would be 25 at the time. And so just struggling the whole year. And then once it's like in Nashville, once you get dropped, like you're a leper, man. Like they won't touch you. No other labels will touch you. So I spent the second year learning how to like at least break even is the best way I could say it. Like I was breaking even financially. Still didn't have a deal until maybe the end of the year. And then by the third year, I learned how to turn the corner and like exist and turn a profit. So, and then from there on, it was just like, rinse, repeat, multiply. So for me, success, honestly, at first was just survival. It was a time in the industry where, no Christian hip hop artist had ever broke 100,000 records. It was constantly, relegated to over here. I was stuck somewhere between these two worlds, where it's like the Christian hip hop world where it was just disrespected and you couldn't really make a living. And then you had the CCM world and trying to like live these two worlds. Cause you're talking about a guy who came up like opening up for Wu-Tang and Tribe Called Quest and like battling dudes and like going to Scribble Jam. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. You were opening up for those guys. That's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You name it. Like we did the circuit, cause Florida is not it's Bible Belt, but it's not. So like the sacred secular divide is not the same, right? So
did you choose this route because you thought it would be the most advantageous financially, or was it kind of a moral thing like, hey, I'm a Christian, so this is the outlet that I want to choose?
Well, no, I was doing those venues and playing those shows as a believer. Like I was
I know, but once you started turning towards is Essential a Christian label?
So it was a Christian label. So okay. I think even throughout the rest of my career, I never really stopped doing those things, right? My thing was like, I would do outreaches in the hood, but I was out there with a church. I would go to a club and battle as a believer. And then I would do straight up church shows. Like I was doing all those 3 things. Now at different points in my life, one of those was more than the other, but I always never stopped doing that. Even as with the deal, like I had a deal, I was touring, things were going great. I was still battling it locally. You know what I mean?
And when you were doing that, did people know you as, oh, that's the kick-ass Christian guy that can spit really
yeah, it's because it was Florida. They just don't think in terms of sacred and secular, right?
Okay.
It was just very like, oh man, you dope. Hey, you want to hit this? You know what I mean? It'd be like that. So it's just not the same. They did. And some people took issue with it and some people didn't care. And some people, it's just that Florida's just a different animal. That's the only way I could describe it.
Is it one of the only markets where the white and white straight male doesn't help and maybe even hurts? Like seriously, as a guy who has invested your life in hip hop, is your color a hindrance ever?
Definitely coming up in the 90s into the 2000s. I don't know if now it's so different. Like there's an audience for everybody. But yes, absolutely in the 90s into the 2000s, it was all how you looked at it. Did I go through the time where I'm like bitter and mad and like, head down, kicking rocks? Of course, everybody does. But I also had the other effect, which was, I'm out in the housing projects as my job. I was a youth pastor, inner city youth pastor. So I was tested constantly. But if you take that test and you learn how to adapt from it, it actually makes you better. So it was like the white boys that survived the 90s and the 2000s were just a different breed. It's not like now where you could be anything and find an audience. There's no checks and balances in the same way.
Gotcha.
Whereas
the internet, it gives you so much exposure, so many people.
Yeah. So you can find your audience really quickly and you don't necessarily have to go through these testing things. Where I was from, that was not the case. So you would have to rhyme better than the average black guy. You would have to be able to freestyle better than the average black dude. You would have to know your place even in hip hop. To come in not with an attitude of like entitlement, you had to come in with an attitude of humility, but you also had to understand like this is the 90s when 5%er thought process is prevalent, it's hugely prevalent, which the core of that is black man is God, white man is the devil. Definitely pretty anti-Christian. It just made you a better MC. It made you a better, well-rounded, I don't want to say person, but it definitely made you a better performer. So like we opened up for Tribe Called Quest, got booed off the stage. We would go to open mics, couldn't even get a chance to rhyme, just get stuff thrown at us, right?
Is this because of lyrical content?
Sometimes it was just perception. And I made a decided change. I'll be honest with you. I made a decided change after that Tribe show that I would rather be booed for being a believer than being booed for the skin tone. And so I kind of changed my approach to an extent, not in an obnoxious way, but it became now in those environments. That was the first thing out of my mouth. So I'm like, I'm not doing too well with my melanin aspect. And ironically, after that shift, it didn't happen again. You know what I mean?
As a youngster, were you heavily into this for the ministry aspect? Like, did you see yourself as, hey, I'm an evangelist, dressed as a rapper? Yeah.
So, part of my story is I didn't come to Christ until I was 15.
Okay.
So I did not grow up in what you would call a Christian home. Little bit of Catholicism, but by and large, no. So yes, after that, coming to Christ, the early Christian hip hop was very evangelistic. You know what I mean? So it was like really about that. So you kind of took that by osmosis, but that was kind of my heart anyway.
Yeah.
But there was multiple.
The suckiest thing for you guys, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Go ahead. No, it's fine.
Thing, because I listened to so much Christian rap, the only way that you could pair yourself with the violent and gangster talk of the secular is to talk about demons. That's like you had to figure out a way of doing it in the least cheesiest way possible.
Satan caught a lot of bodies in the 90s. And it's funny.
187 on Satan.
Oh, holding my Bible gat sideways, 66 books. Dude, I've said it all, thought it all, rapped it all, done it all. And you're absolutely right. And it's funny to look back on because it was almost like a rite of passage that you had to write a demon killing verse. And I mentor some people here locally at my church, and one of them is a Christian rap kid. And that thought process is not, in hip hop Christian rap now.
Yeah.
And out of nowhere, he wrote a verse like that. And I was just like, whoa. But I had, I at least I was open to correction. And so like you listen to this and you're like, okay, I keep writing these raps. And then someone like kind of brought up something biblically that I was like, I don't know if this really meshes with the biblical standard of like how you're supposed to talk about X, Y, Z. And I really decidedly stopped doing that after that point. But you're right. It's true. It's like, I can't kill you, so I'm going to kill you demonically, right?
Gospel gangsters, they kind of towed a line. Like there was actually a line where they said, what if you run up? Oh, we going to get you off us. Like,
no. They were like, we're really packing. Yeah, they were not. They were not, they would shoot a demon and shoot you simultaneously. They would let you know that.
Hey, do you think, and this is my, from a consumer standpoint, this is my novice vantage point, has Lecrae made the biggest contributions, do you think, to the merging and blurring the lines of what we were grown up to be taught as secular and Christian? I mean, he's on the Jimmy Fallon show with the Roots, and I mean, he's figured out how to do lyrics in a way where everybody can kind of grapple with it, Christian or non. I think
yes, there's no question he's gone the farthest. Give him the flowers, no question. I would have to say though, he has benefited from the shift in music. That's where things have changed. So
tell me about that.
I think once we went to streaming and playlists, and that became the dominant way of discovering music, connecting with music, right? Once things stopped being Christian bookstore over here, mainstream bookstore over there, right? Once that dissolved and it was no longer an album format, what actually happened is Drake lives next to Lecrae, which lives next to, Arctic Monkeys, which lives next to. So it became less about segregating music, and music is just music, right? Which also meant from a faith perspective, people became less caring about those dividing lines, right? So, and this is just my speculation, and I think I know what I'm talking about, but I would say what actually happened is Lecrae started doing so incredibly well in the Christian market that the mainstream market said, who was failing, right? The mainstream market is failing from a brick and mortar CD standpoint. And this has never not happened. This has happened all the time. They said, well, if we attach ourselves to that in some way, shape, or fashion, we can benefit from it. And then it becomes a mutually beneficial relationship, right? But what started to happen too is that people just stopped, on both sides, people on both sides, on the Christian market side and the mainstream market side, those hard drawn lines got blurred.
Yeah.
And that's just what happened. And so money talks. Like at the end of the day, money talks. If you're selling units, that's all people on the mainstream side might see. So come on over here.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the church relaxed too, because the other problem was you could do those things in the past and you could get like shunned. Right. And that would hurt your bottom line. Now,
like Amy Grant, I mean, when she put out Heart in Motion, I mean, you might as well have just considered her Jezebel,
right?
That spit at the feet of Jesus.
Right.
I mean, it's just crazy how Christians saw that.
So that would have a curse of death back in the day, potentially. What has happened now is that can still have a curse of death, but it doesn't affect you. So you can continue to march on. So I think what's also happened in Lecrae's situation is that you see now that he's kind of come back in the sayings. You see him back in churches. You see him doing conferences, fill in the blank. So, and I think we had glimpses of that back in the day. It just didn't translate the same way.
As the music industry has changed like crazy, have you taken kind of are you back in this as far as taking a long break, or have you been doing music all along? Like, I know you got a Kickstarter. What's that all about? Like, you kind of re-upping things in the music scene?
Well, my deal actually was up with Tooth and Nail in about 2012, I think it was, approximately. So I spent about 2 years floating or whatever, then signed a kind of like a one-page deal with my manager. At the time, that's around 2015. All that was up around 2016. And so as of 2016, I decidedly shifted into the crowdfunding kind of model, right?
Gotcha.
So by 2017, I did my first crowdfund, and I've been doing crowdfunding pretty much ever since then. And that's like 2 books, multiple albums, a documentary.
I'm unaware. Yeah.
Well, I also realized that I could actually kind of narrow focus, hone into this audience that was like my core, hardcore KJ fans. And I knew that that would let other things go, and the perception would be that, he's moved on or whatever. And I was actually okay with that. Like, I was like, I can actually just hone in, focus on this like small percentage and make music for them. And it actually continued to just fund what I was already doing. I was still traveling. I was still doing 100, 150 shows a year. I was still doing a lot of the conferences.
Still as in when?
Pretty much from 2015 on, really up to 2020 when I got off the road to come full time at the church. I'm a hustler. Like I'm a hard worker. I always found a way to make it, but I also was very realistic about myself. And I saw probably around, honestly, all the way back in 2007, 2008, like I saw the writing on the wall that if you don't have an independent mindset, you're just going to get left behind. And so I already started making moves for that way back then. So from a music standpoint, I've been crowdfunding since 2017 till just now.
Awesome, man. That's awesome. I mean, congrats. That's a big deal to do it that way.
Yeah.
All right. So I got to ask an Eminem question, and then let's go into faith stuff. Early in your career, I got to ask, did you have like this something deep down inside, like God's going to use me to save this guy? I'm going to save Eminem.
Absolutely.
Feel people in on
absolutely unequivocally no.
Oh man.
No, absolutely not. I wish I was that. I wish I was this smart to think, all the way back then. So let's back up the story. So like around 96, 97, we're doing the battle circuit. We're doing the opening secular circuit. We're going to, South Beach and opening it up for Beat Nuts and you name it. So around that time, we were actually on DJ Khaled's pirate radio station. This is way before who he is now. And I never forget, like somebody was like, we were just freestyling on the station, and somebody goes, one of the guys, he goes, oh, you got to listen to my boy Eminem out of Detroit. And I'm like, it's a white boy out of Detroit. I'm like, that ain't never gonna work. You know what I mean? And he quoted one of his lyrics, and I'm like, that sounds stupid. You know what I mean? Like I was like, I made a face because it didn't translate. And
dude, so many people right now are like, oh, I thought for sure KJ started his career after he heard Eminem. Like
no
misconceptions.
No, but
it's so crazy.
So I was aware of him. And then, 90, I think it was 97, 98, he comes out with the Slim Shady EP, which is before he got signed, right? So again, I was aware of all this stuff, not necessarily following. And then I remember getting his little demo tape somewhere when I was like hustling stuff independently. And I'm like, I listened to it. I'm like, okay, white boy shock rap. You know what I mean? I'm like, I get the lane that he's trying to be. You couldn't deny the talent, but I'm like, I wonder if this is going to work. So again, 98, 99, he comes out or whatever, blows up. I had already been working on my first album starting in 98. And so anything that became my first album was already started 2 years prior. So my record actually drops in 2000, which the timing of this means I come out after him, even though the project is before him. So, man, inevitably people are like, man, you sound like him. You're trying to copy his style. You're the alternative, blah, blah, blah.
Is this essential or Up Rock?
This is essential. Yeah, it's before Up Rock. So, and I'm like, at this point, I'm still like a backpacker, man. I'm walking around with spray cans in my pack, black books, and I'm like, beating the chest of hard, real hip hop. Yeah. And so to get that, it's like the ultimate insult. And I'm like fighting it. I'm angry about it. I'm like, y'all don't even know rap. We don't even sound the same, blah, blah, blah. We don't even rhyme the same, I spent the first year, just like, nah, you bugging, what you talking about. And long story short, I did what most rappers would do at the time. Like if there's something on your head or your heart or whatever, you just write a song about it. But what would happen back then is you did what was called the mixtape style, which is where you take their beat and you rhyme over their beat to address what it's about. And so I wrote Dear Slim, not even over Stan, but I was like, Stan came out around the same time. I'm like, okay, what if I flip Stan's idea on the head? Because that's what you would do. You would take their concept and you would flip it to address them. Except I'm like, I'm not going to diss this guy. I'm going to just share my story with him. I actually wrote it to like a Roots instrumental. I write the song. Can't even come up with a hook. All the hooks are blank. I perform this song on a whim. Again, this is when I don't have a deal. I've been dropped. And I did this song live, and people were just like mouth wide open. And I had not ever really written a song where I'd seen that sort of reaction. I didn't have a hook, so I just started saying la 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 to fill in the space. People picked up the hook immediately. And as soon as I stepped off stage, people were like, yo, man, we're like, where do I get this song? Like, where? I'm like, that? I'm like, it's got like a 48 bar verse. Like nothing of it sits the conventional way you would write a song. So all this is happening that year while I'm trying to get a record deal after I lost my deal. I kind of shelved it like, wow, maybe there's something here that I'm not realizing. When I get my deal with Tooth and Nail, I was like, I remember telling Brandon or whoever, I was like, yo, man, I got this song called Dear Slim, and like people are just really reacting to it. And I don't even think they were just like, all right, whatever, like I record it, we make a new track to it. I put it out. It took a life of its own, right? So we decided like this needs to be the first video. We do the video, and that's when Brandon had all his connections with MTV2 and all this stuff, and we send it off to MTV2, and we hear nothing back. And months go by, like a month or two goes by. I get a phone call out of nowhere from Tooth and Nail. They're like, TRL is going to play it tomorrow, right? Wow. And they told us they're going to make it controversial. I'm like, this is the biggest platform
Yeah. And I want to say, not to swell your head, but for music fans, like, it doesn't matter if this was about Eminem or not. If it sucked, nobody's going to do anything. So, I mean, the bottom line is it was good. It
was good to some people, and it was the worst song ever to other people. And that's the thing I didn't understand about music back then, is that the greatest songs, or there's no real good or bad music. There's just effective and non-effective. That's the way I look at things now. And to other people, like, this song sucks. You are misrepresenting Christian hip hop. You are misrepresenting God. You're, they had 1,000 things. Oh, you're dissing Eminem, from a secular side. You're dissing Eminem. You're jock riding, whatever you want to call it. And what it decidedly shifted was my mindset. Instead of saying, I'm going to fight this, these Eminem comparisons, I'm going to go, if that's what works for you, good for you.
Yeah.
If me being an Eminem alternative works for you, okay. That's not I don't think it is, but I'm not going to fight it anymore. And so I didn't run after it. I didn't run away from it. I just let it be whatever it is, because I realized people determine the music.
Right.
But, again, MTV takes it. They diss it. Christian rappers are dissing me. They're putting out songs against me. Secular rappers are writing songs about me. I'm getting death threats.
Really?
Again, it's an early age at Christian hip hop, and they're like, of all the guys that represent us, him. You know what I mean? Like, and jealousy plays into it, and immaturity. Anyway, all that to be said, in the meantime, the song is connecting, and it's connecting with people, and it takes on a life of its own, and it really propels that record. And that's why my second record does infinitely more sales than the first one did. It did over 100,000. It's opened up the doors. And that's why by the time I hit my third year, I can't say I was like living large, but I was just like, it was working. But again, I'm like, well, I guess that's it. That's my 1 minute of fame, and then I walk off a stage and the guy's like, oh, I'm POD's road pastor. I met Eminem last night. I gave him your CD. I'm like, what? And then a couple years go by, and then guy hits me. He's like, oh, I'm ministering to Kim Mathers in jail, and I want to give her your music. And I'm like, this is insane. You know what I mean? That's like, neat, I'm talking to her through him. And then again, a couple more years go by. VH1 puts me on the 40 worst moments of hip hop, because of this song. And every time I thought, surely nothing else can happen. And then, again, like almost 10 years later, Eminem writes a verse called, be careful what you wish for. Talks about a fan who'd been praying for him, how it weighed on his mind. And I can't say that's me definitively, but it sounds like it, what I'm saying? And so all this goes on for years and years and years, for a song I wrote at 2 a.m, probably in my underwear, you know what I mean? And all that to be said, here it is. All these years later, he puts out that verse on Khaled's record. This is what's the funniest thing. It's 20 years later, right? He puts out the verse talking about, not cussing in the song, and Jesus is his savior and all this stuff. And everybody goes, you did it, bro. You prophesied it and you made it happen. I'm like, let's pump the brakes a little bit. But through the process,
let's just go ahead and give him credit for Mace too, man.
I know. I'm like, come on, you guys are too. It's ridiculous. But over the period of time, like, got to know the guy that his aunt did their wedding, right, and got to know these peripheral people around his life, and got to understand his, his actual settings. And so I'm not from Michigan, but I spent all my summers in Michigan. So like, my mom's from Detroit. You know what I mean? So like, I understand Detroit to an extent. I can understand how this produces somebody like him. He's also from Kansas City. Most people don't know. So I also never wanted this to be like some campaign of revival. That I also thought was kind of silly. I'm like, this is another person, very talented, but he's another person.
Let me ask you one. This just popped in my head. Let me ask you a question about another artist, and then I want to talk some faith before we wrap this up. But NF, are you familiar with NF?
Very familiar, yeah. So,
like, what would you say about his career? It's funny because I remember when he came out with an EP. Sometimes I can snip these out, and I remember we got to get this guy on Bad Christian. He's about to blow up. I know he's about to blow up, and we just never did.
Yeah.
It seems like he has a pretty big career, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, is he selling a lot of stuff?
Yeah, he's done tremendously well for himself. And it's one of these ironic stories. Like, I met Lecrae back in 2005, right? Yeah, like before he even had his deal, he was actually checking me on some stuff spiritually. It was like really great moment. But NF is similar situation. Like, I met him, he might have only been 18. I feel like he was opening up for me at a festival in Michigan. But he's from Gladwin. My summers were spent in Higgins Lake. These two towns are 40 minutes from each other. So when I found out he was from Gladwin, I'm like, dude, I know where Gladwin is. I know I know how you came up. I know these small little Michigan towns and stuff like that. And ran in the same circles, hung out, did shows, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to like say, oh, this me and him are homies. You know what I mean? But we just inevitably you end up hanging out a lot. And I watched his trajectory. But he was one of the first artists that I noticed was a product of the new situation, meaning you sign to a major label, they own a lot of the playlists. So they can insert their artists into, you like so-and-so, you'll like this person. So,
yeah.
And I'm not taking away from his songs or his talent or his songwriting ability, but he got that kind of like, he was one of the first guys to get that helped a ton. So I would meet people in like my mainstream events that I would do. They'd be like, you ever heard this guy NF? Like he just showed up in my, suggested, he's pretty good. He doesn't cuss. Like he sounds like Eminem. And that was kind of the shift too, is that he would get so many Eminem comparisons where that was a kiss of death 20 years prior. Now people are like, I like it. So I was at his last Christian show. So we would do Camp Electric together. And I would do Camp Electric, which is like Toby Mac's music camp. And I would do it, I would perform or I would host, I would do workshops. And he would just perform. And I never forget, like we hung out that day. We went to Whole Foods because he was like, I was like, you like to eat healthy? He's like, yeah. And I remember him telling me, he's like, this is going to be my last faith show because they just don't get me. You know what I mean? And he was able to go and essentially write his own ticket where that, again, 20 years prior, that was a kiss of death.
Yeah.
Right. So you could play and he became a hard ticket artist. And kind of after that, I really lost touch with him.
Yep.
But that's the big difference is everybody can find their niche and their audience with the right song.
Yep.
So,
yep. All right, man. So we've grown up since 25, 30 years ago. I'll speak for myself. I'm not a young man anymore. I'm just a man. It's funny. I remember looking at my teachers when they're in their 30s. And
right.
I think they were young. They're just old teachers. Now I'm 45 years old.
Right.
My faith has changed dramatically. I know the big word nowadays is deconstruction. And, I'd have to put myself in that category, honestly.
In what way?
Would you put yourself... I'm sorry?
Wait, what way is like... Because that's such a broad term now.
Yeah.
What would you say...
Yeah, I think for me, it started with how, like, the first thing that ever happened was I talked to a guy that knew the Bible obviously way more than I did, was way more studied, was actually a Calvinist, but said Scripture definitely points to a final extinction of the unredeemed. Like people are not burning forever and ever and ever; they're basically annihilated. And hearing his use of scripture and just how he would demolish people in debates, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like rocking my world here, because I've always believed a certain way. And then honestly, that led me, well, I the two were probably not related, but I started to see how I was taught to read the Bible. It just wasn't working. And I'm not saying like I was putting the Bible and God on the judgment seat as much as I think that I was realizing that, okay, I think God is bigger than the Bible. And once you cross that line of seeing God as bigger than the Bible, things just start to change. So I consider myself 100% Christian. I worship Jesus. I believe he's God. I believe in the death and resurrection. But then there's so many things that I've just kind of backed off on and either don't believe anymore or it's just not as important.
I was just trying to see what you meant by that. So would you say you're an annihilationist? I mean, you believe that?
No, I mean, honestly, I know this really puts me in the heretical category, but after tons of reading from people way smarter than me, I watched a documentary called Hellbound, which represented the various outlooks on hell in the Bible, and I really feel that Jesus figures it out for everyone. So I would be what you would call
universalist,
a Christ-centered universalist.
Gotcha.
Not universalist just in that we all just happily end up. I think Jesus did something that needed to be done. I don't really understand what, but I do believe that redemption is not only happening but will happen, and it's really good news, is what I believe.
Gotcha.
Like really, really good news. So that's
your main
shift.
Your main deconstruction would be your view of eternity. And
yeah, I mean, I would say that, and then my listeners will love how I'll say this: the gay thing are probably the two biggest, lowest hanging fruit that are probably the most problematic for evangelicals I've found. But my approach has never been combative. It's never been like point the finger. You guys are, I really just see us all as just doing the best we can. And I'm trying to be honest in my journey with God. And I feel like God's on it with me. And I'm right about some things and wrong about some things. So,
so I was just, it's such a broad term. I just kind of was trying to get nuance to that. So by no means am I trying to argue or debate. That's probably a whole nother podcast if we went there. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. I'm sorry. I guess we were getting to a question, weren't we?
So just basically what your faith journey has been as you've gone basically from a young man and now you're an adult. Grown up.
So it's interesting you're talking about some of that stuff. So I got, I came to faith at 15, a little bit of like, well, I'm never going back to the Catholic experience. Like I want the super excited, everybody's excited about Jesus type of experience, the Black experience or whatever you want to call it. And I became part of the Assemblies of God. Me too. So that was like a good chunk of good, bad, or indifferent was my formative years, I guess you could say. And so, and again, when you're a teenager, you ain't even got a frontal lobe to work with, you know what I mean? So a lot of the dogmatic aspects I think I was about, I've definitely calmed down or found at least grace for other people. I ran to Jesus out of a very traumatic childhood and, you fill in the blank of 1,000 things. We could talk about that. So I think there's a lot of things that I have to look back on and go, okay, that probably just reinforced poor characteristics of myself, XYZ. So I can definitely say some of the things I've let go of in light of tradition, or cultural Christianity that's very nuanced to whatever particular flavor you go with, right? I think over time, I weighed a lot of those things in light of scripture, in light of historical context, in light of just learning more, in light of my growth as a man. You're talking about a kid who would because hip hop was such a big thing to me, like I did the whole secular CD, throw them away, cassettes, almost a point, like if I heard anything even playing over a loudspeaker in a store, I'm like, you know what I mean? Like it was
I would have albums that I just didn't think was Christian enough and they didn't say Jesus enough.
Totally.
I needed to get rid of
very dogmatic. Absolutely went through that. You know what I mean? And again, understanding art versus like ministry and you get a mindset like it has to be all about ministry or it can't be about art, and just realizing that's totally not a biblical concept. You know what I mean? Like that's just a cultural concept that was caught, not taught, more or less. So a lot of that, I relaxed on a lot of the way I probably very like black and white about how I dealt with people. Well, I can do it. You should be able to do it. Or, well, this is clear. So, I've found a lot better ways to communicate my faith or communicate my convictions, or even just give grace to people to be like, I guess we don't see eye to eye here. Okay, that's all right. We can still be homies. You know what I mean? I still love you. Like if we would have had this conversation, golly, maybe even 10 years ago, I would have already been like, have you to the wall trying to defend your position. Right. And I would have given you 10 reasons why you're wrong. And I would have been doing it very effectively.
Let's do it, man.
With nothing more than the idea of like checking off a notch. You know what I mean? Right. Like I'm not that guy now. Right.
Well, and part of it is you probably felt a responsibility to do it. I know that I did. I'm sure there was some arrogance there. At least there was for me. But a lot of it was motivated by, I think this is what I have to do. Like, I think this is what God wants me to
defend the faith. Right? Yeah. It was sincerity mixed with arrogance, mixed with like, I like to be right. Some of that has merit and some of it is flat out sinful. You know what I mean? Yep. So
what are some ways that you think that the church, capital C, could stand to change?
That is a great question. I read that when you sent that to me and I'm like, man, it's so broad. It's so broad that I don't really know that I could answer that outside of the typical cliche answer. And I don't want to do that. I could tell you where I need to change.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm part of the church. I know that the more I pursue the characteristics of who God is, the better I am, period. You could be the biggest atheist on the planet and you could probably agree with me right there, right? Like there's just something about when I go after his character, his principles, his thought process, his way of doing things, I'm better and everybody else around me is better. That's the only way I could explain it. So, And I think we could lose
first the kingdom.
Yeah, and I think we could lose a lot of our cultural Christianity. There's definitely some problems with that. I've seen literally both sides. Like, it's weird because, like, I have friends that are, you would maybe consider them Christian nationalists, and I have the most wokey of the wokies. I've even walked in both of those spaces, right? Two sides of the dirty coin, right? It's no different.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I've told people, like, I don't see Christian fellowship in the same way. I do hold it very dear because there is something about being with people who share a common hope, but it's a lot less for me about being in, like you said, the wokey crowd or the more traditional crowd. I just want to be around people that are willing to love and listen to people that are different, whatever. Like, those are the people that I want to. So if you're the most conservative of conservatives, I still want to hang out with you because of how you are trying to interact with people. Like, that's what's most important to me now.
Well, and I tell you, man, it's weird that I came on staff at a church at like the most insane time.
Right.
Like, I went on staff at a church January 6, 2020. Like 3 months later, We're in the middle of the pandemic, race riots. We're in the middle of fill in the blank. And then we go out of that into politically charged fill in the blank. And now we're in the culture wars. And
all right. So these last two questions, man, you can we can either do them both or just one of them. But
okay.
Does anyone sound more appealing? 3 things that you took most of your life to learn, and or what's the next thing that you'd like to come close in overcoming?
I'll take the second question. The first question is great, but I'll take the second one. The big thing that I'm really looking to overcome, and it sounds really silly to say this, is poor neural pathways in my brain. And I'll back that up about 10 steps. Even though this has been churning in my heart for quite a while, we had a young man, unfortunately, and I've actually had suicide in my family, extended family. We had a young man take his life at our church. Dang. And
I have my history too.
So this is coming out of the hurricane, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So,
like, down here where the hurricane hit, like, we've moved past the destruction and into the other ripple effects that I'm starting to see. And anyway, all that to be said, I thought as a pastor, I should lead by example. And when tragedies happen, people all go, well, we should have done this, we should have done that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start with me. And so in the last couple weeks, months, I've been I was like, I need to get into therapy. Like, I need to go back and reexamine why certain things are about me, why I think certain ways, and why I act certain ways, and why I struggle with X, Y, Z. So when you're asking me what I would change, I'm realizing through, I have as a Christian therapist, but I realized that because of childhood and upbringing, your brain goes a certain way, right? It's a well-worn path, good, bad, or indifferent. And some of those are bad. And so what I'm learning now through God's word and through prayer and through just cognitive behavioral therapy is that I got to forge new paths in my brain.
Yep. Right.
So if I think this person is out to get me, even though they may be or may not be, it's just in my head, I'm realizing where that comes from. And I'm like, okay, time to change that. I've been doing boxing for almost 2 years now. And, I'm in there sparring with dudes half my age, easily the oldest guy in there. It's been transformative, whatever the point being. But there was times where I was like, man, I go to spar and my body would just shut down.
Right.
And I'm like, why am I feeling this way? Like, and I'm realizing it comes from just a fear of losing status with other men. I'm like, well, where did that come from? Back it up 20 steps.
It's a lot of work, isn't it?
But the beauty is, like, the brain is so changeable, right? So that's what I'm learning to change. And it took me a long time to get to this place. But the beauty is, as I become more healthy, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, it translates to everybody around me. You know what I mean? So as a leader gets healthy, his people get healthy. You can lead by example. And I think this is one of my personal convictions. I think we in the church should lead the charge of mental health.
Right.
We as pastors should lead the charge. And not to say we walk around like, I'm so screwed up. Like, the people don't really want to hear that. But you could at least go, I don't have it all together, but I'm working on it. And as I grow, I can help you grow.
So I pastored a church from a campus of the church that I'm a part of from 2008 to around 2020. And
where was this?
This is Seacoast Church in Charleston, South Carolina, spread out in the Southeast.
Cool.
But basically, I had a mental health crisis, and honestly, it was a nightmarish time. But as far as the church and how the church worked, it was a beautiful picture of the people that looked at me and called me pastor and would come to me for guidance was now the ones pastoring me, guiding me, being there for me. And obviously I had people that I considered, pastors in my life. For me, it didn't obliterate any sort of way that I had pastored in the past. Like I had always kind of lived in a way of, hey, for some reason, God's given me responsibility to lead this, but that I'm not more qualified, better. I don't struggle less or anything like that. I can't be a pastor any other way. Like if someone wants me to, pretend I'm something that I'm not, or that I don't need other people, then I don't want anything to do with it. But yeah, a lot of people will struggle with this when I say it, but I don't see any other way of it. Is that I do believe in a spiritual being that's a part of us, but bottom line is we process all of it. Spirituality, our spiritual brain, all of it is processed in a organ that's made of tissue.
Right.
And that doesn't minimize God. That to me, that magnifies just how great of a creator he is. But when that brain is not working, it screws everything up, even our spiritual processing. And that's what Christians have got to wrap their mind around.
Sure.
That it's not like this pray thing that makes mental health better. Sure, prayer can have its place, but my Lord, therapy, there's medication, there's all sorts of stuff.
Sure. And I liken it to like, well, if your arm was broken,
right,
you would ask for prayer for your arm. You'd also go to the doctor.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? So part of me was like, okay, I'm gonna start doing therapy because I want to lead the charge to those that I lead.
Right.
Not that necessarily I'm in some like really horrible state per se, doing damage triage on my mental health, but I'm also like, man, I don't want to hit a level that just stays here. Right.
Right.
I want to continuously grow. That's one thing I would change, or I should say one thing I'm trying to change. And I've already actually seen just tremendous growth and benefits and calm and the things that we're all probably fighting for.
Yep. Awesome. Well, tell people about Still Standing. It's actually a new album coming up, and it's inspired by Hurricane Ian, right?
Yeah. So Ian hit
Kickstarter. I'll put the link in the show notes.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Ian hit about 2 months ago. And I've been kicking around a couple songs, but I didn't really know what to do with them. And for those that don't know, like it was the worst hurricane that's ever hit Florida. They call it the 500-year storm, and we were dead center. And I've lived through multiple hurricanes, obviously being in Florida my whole life, but there was nothing to compare it to this. And so I walked outside after the hurricane. I didn't say pass, it didn't really pass, but after I could go outside, and I looked over and I realized, I was like, why are the power lines so close to my house? And I realized what had happened is the telephone pole in front of my house had snapped, fallen over, but was being held up by the wires. Wow. So had it fell forward, it would be on my car. Had it fell to the side, it'd be in my house. It was just there, snapped and holding. And I just said out loud, I was like, dang, it's still standing. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like multiple layers. Like we're still standing. We need to still stand, and I was like, I took a picture of it. And then all of a sudden, the writer's block that I'd been dealing with, lyrics started flowing.
That notebook came out, or the
notebook came out, and you're talking like we went back to like a third world country. That's the only way I could. No water, no power, no internet, barely usable phones, and I didn't need a break. I went straight to my church, and we started relief efforts like within the next week. And we're talking thousands of people wrapped around the building, and it was just no break. Like and all that to be said, I was like, songs I had written pre-hurricane. These verses like applied to what I was talking about, and so that's all it really was. I got a bunch of great Cash App donations way before I did my Kickstarter. The record was just, everybody just pitched in. Nobody asked for any money. Like people are like, oh dude, here, take some beats. Oh, let me master your record. Let me mix it. Let me do a guest feature. Let me do the artwork. Like, so the Kickstarter really is like, you get the album, it's already done. You just get it. And you know how it is with music now. It's like everything's free anyway. So
yeah.
just throw it out there. But I'm only doing a really short day. I only got 10 days left. So yeah.
Cool. We'll have people go to it.
I actually took some of the donations already, and we threw a giant homecoming for our kids at the church.
Wow.
Because none of these kids got to have a homecoming.
Yeah.
So,
well, man, it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk to you and reminisce about some old school Christian stuff, and then just to get to know a fellow pastor and new friend. So thanks, man.
Yeah, dude. Well, you have a great day, dude.
You too.
Man, this morning really kind of sucked. I'm waking up just with my brain feeling kind of slush. Top flat, car dead, plus I'm kind of stuck. Standing in my driveway, I locked them keys in the trunk. Dang, enough's enough. It's kind of rough. Just when you crush, feeling like 2 shots to the gut. Looking at the news, it's true that it's kind of nuts. It's like we choose how to hate, forgot now who to love. On days like these, it's kind of tough to choose joy, but I'm speaking now that you're enough. I'm praying, Lord, I can hear you cutting through the junk in a world that wants to break me down. Now I need a touch. I'm standing up. I know you're planning up to know that when my plan is stuck, then I'm manning up and trusting you to guide me with your hand of love and provide me all I need when that time is up. But